There is a pervasive myth about people in the past, and that is that back in the days of yore, everybody was much shorter than they are today. According to this popular myth, we've been growing bit by bit taller with each successive generation, and people are significantly taller now than we were even only a couple of hundred years ago. When on holiday, we take snaps of the small quirky doors, and we say, "Look at that door! Look at that door! How can anyone ever have been that small? People in the past were so very small." However, the archaeology disagrees. The skeletons of people in the past are the most direct evidence of their stature and health, and we find a consistent pattern throughout time. That is, for the last 10,000 years, heights for men have been relatively stable, around about 5'10". For women the average is different, but this is because of social factors like marrying early and having children early, which actually stunts your growth. Early urbanism is also a factor which affects our stature. Julius Caesar is an excellent example of this. He was a notoriously short man. Even for a Roman it was noticeable. This is because of how and where Julius Caesar grew up. He hadn't always lived a privileged life. Julius Caesar grew up in the very densely populated heart of Rome, and this would have meant he was exposed to a density of human traffic and waste comparable to those that we see in cities like Mumbai. At times, he would have had to rely on the dole, the state handout of bread, whenever food was scarce in the city. Eventually, Caesar left Rome and went to conquer Gaul at the head of legions of soldiers. And when he wrote back in his diaries about the Gauls and their savage ways, he also mentioned that he had bumped into giants. This was partly a caricature in order to inspire and impress the people at home. But in part, he was telling the truth. But they weren't giants. The Gauls were simply healthy human beings, living outside, living away from their own sewage, and enjoying a healthy diet. Whereas Caesar could not boast any of these attributes. Another good example of culture and environment affecting stature was during the Georgian period, when King George V was on the throne. The aristocracy would actively avoid eating veg because that was a poor person's food. Thus they were shorter, and many of them suffered from the terrible affliction called gout. If you weren't a member of the aristocracy, life was equally unhealthy, although for other reasons. Often, for example, you'd be working down mines, mining coal for the British Empire. Dust particles in your lungs and a lack of sunlight was the daily grind of many people from a very young age. Alternatively, you may find yourself working in a factory in cramped, dark conditions, or as a very young child being asked to handle extremely dangerous machinery. And various studies at the time revealed just how dank and cramped living conditions were in the cities. So it is our environment and the many varied things we do to ourselves that limits our growth. In this way, when we come across a small door, we must always be prepared to ask why it is small. It may be due to the limitations of the building materials which are being used. In some cases, it may simply be easier to make a small door. In other cases, doors may be small to limit the draft that can go through a building. And when we see armour and other small items of clothing on display, we must remember that often they are on display because they've never been worn. They've always been display pieces, either in a shop window or simply to show off the skill of the craftsperson who made them. In short, if you'll forgive the pun, archaeology reveals that our assumptions are often misguided, and people will always surprise you.